At my daughter's wedding, I overheard my son-in-law whisper to his father, "I got what I wanted. That old man's money will be mine." When I confronted him, he slapped me so hard I fell. I just gestured to someone waiting in the parking lot. He panicked when he saw who it was. Subscribe to the channel for more stories like this and comment the city you're watching from. I never thought my daughter's wedding day would be the day I'd discover just how naive I'd been for the past 2 years. 63 years old, and I was still learning painful lessons about trust and family. The reception was everything Leah had dreamed of. The ballroom at the Fairmont Hotel sparkled with crystal chandeliers, white roses cascaded from every table, and the champagne flowed freely. I'd spared no expense for my only child's special day. $28,000 for the venue alone, another $15,000 for the flowers, and that didn't even include the band or the photographer. Money I'd gladly spent to see my daughter happy. But as I stood near the bar watching Leah dance with her new husband Justin, something felt wrong. Maybe it was the way Justin kept glancing toward me during their first dance, or how his father Marcus had been asking pointed questions about my business all evening. The feeling had been growing for months, actually, a nagging sensation that I was missing something important. I stepped outside onto the hotel's terrace for some fresh air. The June evening was warm, and I needed a moment to collect myself. Through the large windows, I could see the celebration continuing inside. Leah looked radiant in her grandmother's pearl necklace, the one piece of jewelry my late wife Sarah had insisted be passed down. Justin held her close, whispering something in her ear that made her laugh. That's when I heard them. "Dad, you should have seen how easy this was," Justin's voice carried from just around the corner of the terrace. He was talking to Marcus, both of them hidden by a large, decorative column. "I told you the old man was lonely after his wife died. Leah was perfect, desperate for attention, easily manipulated." My blood turned to ice. I pressed myself against the wall, straining to hear every word. Marcus chuckled. "And she really believes you love her? Please. She's sweet enough, but this was never about love. Did you see how he wrote that check for the wedding without even blinking? The man's sitting on millions, and now it's all going to be mine. I already got her to talk to him about updating his will. Smart boy. How long before you think he'll have an accident?" Justin's laugh was cold, calculating. "Give it 6 months, maybe a year. These old guys, they have heart attacks all the time. Stress of losing a daughter, you know how it is." I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. My hands shook as I gripped the stone railing. They were talking about killing me. My own son-in-law, the man I'd welcomed into my family, was planning my murder. But it was Justin's next words that shattered my heart completely. The best part, Leah has no idea. She actually thinks I married her for love. Poor thing was so desperate after her mother died that she believed every word I said. "Oh, Leah, your father doesn't understand you like I do. He's old-fashioned. He doesn't appreciate how special you are." It was like taking candy from a baby. Marcus laughed again. "You always were good at reading people's weaknesses. Loneliness is the easiest weakness to exploit." She was so grateful for the attention. She would have done anything I asked. Getting her to distance herself from her father was simple. I just had to convince her that he was too controlling, that he didn't want her to be happy. I thought about all the times over the past year when Leah had seemed different, cooler toward me, less likely to return my calls quickly. I'd attributed it to natural changes that come with a serious relationship, a young woman building her own life. But now I understood. She hadn't been growing up. She'd been manipulated. My chest burned with a rage I hadn't felt since Sarah died. These men were talking about my daughter like she was a chess piece, a means to an end. They were planning to take everything I'd worked 40 years to build, and worse, they were going to destroy my relationship with my only child in the process. I had to confront them. I couldn't let this continue for another second. I walked around the corner, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might give out right there. "Having an interesting conversation, gentlemen?" Both men spun around. Justin's face went white, then quickly shifted to a forced smile. "Matthew, we were just getting some air. Beautiful evening, isn't it?" "Cut the act, Justin. I heard everything." Marcus stepped forward, his expression hardening. "Now see here, old man, you don't know what you think you heard. I know exactly what I heard. You're planning to murder me for my money, and you're using my daughter to do it." Justin's mask finally slipped. The charming, loving son-in-law disappeared, replaced by something cold and predatory. "You have no proof of anything. Who's going to believe a confused old man over his daughter's husband? My daughter will believe me when I tell her the truth." "Your daughter?" Justin laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Your daughter hasn't trusted your judgment in over a year. I made sure of that. Every time you try to tell her something negative about me, she's going to remember all the times I warned her that you were jealous of our relationship." The calculated cruelty of it took my breath away. He'd been preparing for this moment, building defenses against any accusations I might make. "Leah loves me," I said. But even as the words left my mouth, I heard how desperate they sounded. "Leah loves the man I pretended to be, and she's convinced that you're a bitter old man who can't stand to see her happy. Face it, Matthew, you've already lost." Something inside me snapped. "You're a monster. I'm a businessman, and you're a dead man walking." That's when I grabbed Justin by his expensive tuxedo jacket. "I won't let you destroy my daughter's life." Justin shoved me hard, sending me stumbling backward. "Don't touch me, old man." But I was beyond reason now. 25 years of missing my wife, 2 years of watching my daughter slip away, and now discovering it was all orchestrated by this sociopath. I lunged at him again. This time, Justin's response was swift and brutal. His hand connected with my face in a slap so hard it echoed across the terrace. The force sent me reeling backward, my legs tangling beneath me. I hit the stone floor hard, my hip taking the worst of the impact. For a moment, I lay there stunned, tasting blood in my mouth. The physical pain was nothing compared to the humiliation. I was a 63-year-old man who'd just been knocked down by someone half my age, someone who was supposed to be family. "Stay down, old man," Justin hissed, straightening his jacket, "and keep your mouth shut, or things will get much worse for you." But as I struggled to sit up, my vision clearing, I did something that made both men freeze. I smiled. Because there, in the parking lot, visible through the terrace railing, I could see a familiar figure leaning against a dark sedan. Detective Ray Morrison looked exactly as he had 3 weeks ago when I'd first hired him. Tall, weathered, with the kind of face that had seen too much but missed nothing. I raised my hand and waved at him. The blood drained from Justin's face as he followed my gaze. "Who is that?" I wiped the blood from my lip and slowly got to my feet. "That, son, is the man who's been watching you for the past 3 weeks, and he just got everything on video." The silence that followed my words was deafening. Justin's confident smirk vanished completely, replaced by something I'd never seen before. Fear. Pure, unadulterated fear. "You're bluffing," he whispered, but his voice cracked on the words. I straightened my jacket, ignoring the throbbing pain in my hip where I'd hit the ground. "Detective Ray Morrison. 25 years with the state police before he went private. I hired him 3 weeks ago." I paused, letting that sink in. "He specializes in matrimonial investigations and fraud cases." Marcus grabbed his son's arm. "Justin, we need to go, now." But Detective Morrison was already walking toward us, his long strides covering the distance from the parking lot quickly. He climbed the stone steps to the terrace with the measured pace of a man who'd done this countless times before. In his hand was a small digital camera, the kind that could capture video in low-light conditions. "Gentlemen," Morrison said as he approached, his voice calm and professional. "Quite a performance you just gave." Justin's face had gone from pale to ashen. "This is harassment. You can't just spy on people." Morrison chuckled, pulling out a small recording device. "Actually, when someone hires me to investigate potential fraud and I'm positioned on public property, I can record whatever I observe. And what I just observed was assault." He looked at me with concern. "You okay, Matthew?" I nodded, though my face was still stinging from the slap. "I've been better, but I've got what I need." "What you need for what?" Justin demanded, his voice rising. Morrison answered for me. "Evidence. See, Matthew came to me 3 weeks ago with some concerns about your sudden appearance in his daughter's life. Successful businessman, recently widowed, wealthy beyond most people's dreams. And suddenly, there's this charming young man who seems almost too good to be true. I watched Justin's Adam's apple bob as he swallowed hard. Behind him, Marcus was looking around frantically, probably calculating escape routes. Matthew's a smart man, Morrison continued. He spent 40 years building a construction empire. You don't do that without learning to spot people who are trying to take advantage of you. So when his daughter started pulling away from him right around the time you showed up, he got suspicious. The truth was, it had started even before that. About 6 months after Sarah died, I'd begun noticing how isolated I'd become. Leah was my only family, and suddenly she was always busy, always had excuses for why she couldn't visit. When she did come by, she seemed distant, almost resentful. Then Justin appeared, and everything changed. Leah was happy again, but that happiness came with a price. She stopped asking about my health, stopped calling just to chat. When I tried to plan family dinners, she'd suggest including Justin's family instead. Slowly, methodically, I was being pushed out of my own daughter's life. The first red flag, Morrison said, was when I ran a basic background check. Justin Thomas Caldwell. Interesting history you have, son. Justin's mouth opened, but no words came out. Born in Nevada, moved around a lot as a kid. 3 arrests for theft before you turned 18, though the charges were dropped. Changed your name when you turned 21? Used to be Justin Thomas Ramirez? Morrison flipped through a small notebook. Amazing how much easier it is to hide your past when you change your name. My stomach dropped. He changed his name? Oh, it gets better. See, I started looking into his employment history, his previous relationships. Very interesting pattern emerged. Morrison's eyes never left Justin's face. You seem to have a type, son. Wealthy older women or men with daughters. Always the same story. Whirlwind romance, quick engagement, and then something unfortunate happens to the person with the money. Marcus made a choking sound. We should call our lawyer. You should, Morrison agreed, because this conversation I just recorded, where you discussed timing Matthew's death to look like a heart attack, that's conspiracy to commit murder in the first degree. The reality of the situation was hitting me in waves. This wasn't just about money. They had actually been planning to kill me. The casual way Justin had discussed it, like he was talking about the weather, made my blood run cold. You can't prove anything, Justin said, but his voice was shaking now. It's just talk. Morrison held up the camera. Actually, I can prove quite a bit. See, I've been documenting your activities for 3 weeks now. The meetings with that insurance agent where you discussed increasing Matthew's life insurance policy. The conversation you had with your friend about handling old people who get in the way. The research you did on making deaths look accidental. My knees almost gave out. Insurance policy? Morrison nodded grimly. $2 million. Justin convinced Leah that it was a smart financial move, protection for her future. She signed the paperwork thinking she was being responsible. The betrayal cut deeper than anything else. My own daughter had unknowingly signed paperwork that would make her rich when I died, never realizing she was being set up as an accomplice to murder. There's more, Morrison said. I traced your financial records, Justin. You're broke, completely tapped out. You've been living on credit cards and loans for the past 2 years, betting everything on this payday. The expensive gifts for Leah, the fancy apartment, the car, it's all borrowed money. You're about 6 weeks away from complete financial collapse. That explained the timeline. Why they were talking about 6 months to a year for my accident. Justin needed time to establish himself as the grieving son-in-law, but not so much time that his debts caught up with him. And here's the really interesting part, Morrison continued. This isn't your first rodeo. I found records of 2 previous relationships. Elizabeth Chen in Sacramento, dated for 8 months before she died in a car accident. Her father died of a heart attack 3 months later, left everything to Elizabeth's estate, which went to her boyfriend. That was you, wasn't it, Justin? Justin was backing away now, his face a mask of panic. That's coincidence. You can't prove. Then there's Margaret Winters in Portland, another whirlwind romance, another convenient death. Her uncle, who raised her after her parents died, had a fall down the stairs. Very sad. Margaret inherited his construction business, which was sold 6 months later. The buyer, a company that traces back to you. My construction business. That's why Justin had seemed so knowledgeable about the industry when we first met. He'd done this before, literally. Morrison stepped closer to Justin, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. The only difference this time is that Matthew was smart enough to see through you before you could finish the job. Justin looked like a cornered animal now. His eyes darted between Morrison, me, and the door leading back to the reception. I could almost see him calculating whether he could make a run for it. "The wedding guests are still inside," I said quietly, "including Leah. She doesn't know any of this yet." For the first time since this conversation started, Justin's expression showed something other than panic. It showed calculation. "You won't tell her? You can't destroy her happiness like that." It was a desperate gambit, but he'd found the one weapon that could still hurt me. He was right. The thought of shattering Leah's world on what was supposed to be the happiest day of her life was almost unbearable. But Morrison saved me from having to make that choice. "Actually, Justin, you're going to tell her yourself. Because if you don't, I'm going to play this recording for every person in that ballroom, starting with your new bride." Justin's last bit of color drained from his face as Morrison held up the small device. "Everything you said about manipulating her, about planning Matthew's death, about the other women, it's all right here." The trapped animal look in Justin's eyes intensified. And that's when I realized something that made my blood run cold. A man with nothing left to lose is the most dangerous kind of man there is. The confrontation on the terrace felt like a lifetime ago, but it had only been 10 minutes. Now we sat in Morrison's rental car in the hotel parking lot, the reception continuing inside without us. Through the windows I could see Leah dancing with her bridesmaids, completely oblivious to the fact that her world was about to collapse. "Tell me how this started," Morrison said, adjusting his rearview mirror to keep an eye on the hotel entrance. "From the beginning." I took a shaky breath, my hands still trembling from the adrenaline. "It was about 8 months after Sarah died. I was barely functioning, if I'm being honest. 43 years of marriage, and suddenly I was eating dinner alone every night, sleeping in an empty house. Leah was worried about me, calling every day, bringing me groceries. Those had been the darkest months of my life. Sarah and I had been high school sweethearts, married at 22, never spent more than a week apart in 4 decades. When the cancer took her, it felt like someone had cut away half of my soul. Leah was my lifeline," I continued. "She'd come over 3 times a week, sometimes just to sit with me while I sorted through her mother's things. We'd never been closer." Morrison nodded, making notes in his small pad. "When did Justin first appear?" "January 15th. I remember the date because it was Sarah's birthday. I was having a particularly bad day, and Leah had planned to spend it with me. But she called that morning saying she'd met someone at her yoga class. Could she bring him to dinner? That dinner should have been my first warning. Justin had been perfectly charming, asking all the right questions about Sarah, expressing just the right amount of sympathy. He'd brought expensive wine, a bottle that cost more than most people spend on groceries for a week. At the time, I'd been impressed by his thoughtfulness. He seemed to genuinely care about making me feel better, I said. Asked about my business, wanted to hear stories about Sarah, said he'd lost his own father recently and understood what I was going through. "All lies," Morrison said grimly. "His father is alive and well, living in Phoenix. Hasn't spoken to his son in 5 years, but definitely alive." The casual way Morrison delivered that information hit me like a physical blow. Even that first meeting, that first impression of empathy and connection, had been completely fabricated. "What made you suspicious?" Morrison asked. "It was gradual, little things that didn't add up." I stared out at the hotel, watching guests move around inside the lit ballroom. Justin claimed to work in marketing for a tech company, but he never seemed to have regular hours. He was always available when Leah wanted to see him, always free for dinner or weekend trips. "Because he wasn't working," Morrison said. "His last real job ended 14 months ago. Since then, he's been living off credit cards and the money he got from Margaret Winter's estate." Margaret Winters. The name still made my stomach turn. Another lonely woman, another grieving family member, another convenient death. "The first real red flag was about 3 months into their relationship," I continued. "Leah started canceling our dinners. At first it was just occasionally. Justin had gotten tickets to a show, or they'd been invited to a party, but then it became a pattern. I remembered the phone calls, how Leah's voice had changed. She'd gone from calling me Daddy to Dad to just Matthew in some conversations. When I asked about it, she'd laughed it off, said Justin thought it was more mature to use my name. He was isolating her, Morrison said. Classic manipulation tactic. Make the target dependent on you by cutting them off from their support system. But he was so subtle about it. He never directly told her not to see me. Instead, he'd plan romantic surprises that conflicted with our standing dinner dates. He'd book weekend getaways during times when I was expecting her to visit. And when she'd apologize for canceling, he'd be right there telling her how understanding he was, how he'd never want to come between her and her father. The insidious nature of it was what made it so effective. Leah never felt like she was choosing Justin over me because he never asked her to make that choice. He just made sure that choosing him was always more appealing, more exciting, more romantic than spending time with her grieving father. When did the financial questions start? Morrison asked. About 6 months ago. At first, they seemed innocent enough. Justin mentioned that he and Leah had been talking about their future, about financial planning. He asked if I'd done estate planning, if I had a will. I'd been touched by his apparent maturity, his concern for Leah's future security. When I told him that most of my assets would go to Leah, he'd nodded approvingly, said she was lucky to have such a responsible father. Then came the life insurance suggestion, I said. He'd done research, found out that someone in my income bracket should have more coverage, said it was irresponsible of me not to protect Leah's inheritance from estate taxes. Morrison shook his head. $2 million policy, more than enough to pay off his debts and give him a comfortable start on finding his next target. The insurance agent was someone Justin recommended, said he was a family friend, very trustworthy. I should have realized it was suspicious that this family friend was willing to write such a large policy on a 63-year-old man without requiring an extensive physical. Because the agent was in on it, Morrison said, part of Justin's network. We'll get to him eventually, but right now, I'm more concerned about the immediate threat. The immediate threat. The casual way Justin had discussed timing my death, the matter-of-fact planning of my murder. Even now, sitting in the safety of Morrison's car, I felt a chill run down my spine. What really convinced me to hire you was the conversation I overheard 2 weeks ago, I said. Leah was on the phone with someone, and she was crying. She kept saying, I know you're right, but he's still my father. I'd stood outside her apartment door for 20 minutes, listening to my daughter sob, while someone convinced her that I was a burden, that I was holding her back from happiness. When she finally opened the door, her eyes were red and swollen, but she'd smiled and acted like everything was fine. Who was she talking to? Morrison asked. Justin. He was coaching her through what he called setting healthy boundaries, telling her that my grief was becoming unhealthy, that I was too dependent on her for emotional support. It had been devastating to hear my daughter repeat Justin's psychological manipulation back to me, as if it were her own insight. She'd suggested I see a therapist, maybe consider moving to a retirement community where I'd have age-appropriate social interactions. The retirement community suggestion wasn't random, Morrison said. Justin had been researching facilities, expensive ones that would have required you to liquidate most of your assets. He wanted me poor and isolated, easier to control, harder for anyone to notice when you died. A lonely old man in a retirement home having a heart attack? Nobody investigates that too carefully. Morrison pulled out a thick file folder from his briefcase. But I've been investigating Justin very carefully, and what I found would horrify you. He opened the folder, revealing photographs, financial records, and what looked like police reports. Elizabeth Chen was 28, worked as a graphic designer in Sacramento. Her father owned a small chain of hardware stores worth about $3 million. The first photograph showed a young Asian woman with a bright smile, standing next to an older man who looked proud and happy. The second photograph was from a newspaper, a mangled car beside a tree, the headline reading, "Local woman dies in single car accident." Justin dated Elizabeth for 8 months. During that time, she became distant from her father, started questioning his business decisions. Sound familiar? My mouth went dry. What happened to her father? Heart attack 3 months after Elizabeth died. The stress of losing his daughter, according to the death certificate. Very sad. Very believable. Morrison turned the page. Except that Elizabeth had recently increased his life insurance and added Justin as the secondary beneficiary after herself. The pattern was becoming sickeningly clear. How many others? That I can prove? 3, including Elizabeth and Margaret. But I suspect there are more. Justin's been perfecting this con for at least 5 years. Morrison showed me another photograph, a middle-aged woman with gray hair and kind eyes. Margaret Winters, age 34, inherited her uncle's construction business in Portland. Sound familiar? It did. Too familiar. That's why Justin knew so much about construction when we first met. He'd spent 6 months learning everything he could about the industry while he courted Margaret. When her uncle died and left her the business, Justin convinced her to sell it, said the stress of running a company was too much for someone dealing with grief. And the buyer? A shell company Justin had set up. He bought the business from Margaret for half its actual value, then immediately sold it to a legitimate company for full market price. Cleared about $2 million profit. I felt sick. Margaret didn't know? Margaret thought she was making a smart business decision based on the advice of the man who loved her. Just like Leah thinks she's making smart decisions about life insurance and retirement communities. Morrison closed the file. The difference is, we caught Justin before he could complete the cycle. Margaret and Elizabeth weren't lucky enough to have fathers who got suspicious in time. Through the hotel windows, I could see the reception was winding down. Guests were beginning to leave, and soon Leah would wonder where I'd gone. Soon, I'd have to face my daughter and destroy the happiest day of her life with the truth about the man she'd just married. "There's something else," Morrison said quietly. "Something I haven't told you yet." The tone of his voice made my stomach clench. "What?" "I found evidence that Justin has been slipping something into your drinks when he visits. Nothing immediately dangerous, but something that would cause memory issues, confusion, make you seem like you might be developing dementia." The room spun around me. "The medicine cabinet." "What?" "Last month, when they came for dinner, I found Justin in my bathroom. He said he was looking for aspirin, but my medicine cabinet was open. I thought it was odd, but I didn't." I trailed off, the implications hitting me. He was probably replacing some of your medications with lookalikes, or adding something to make you seem confused or forgetful. Classic gaslighting technique. Leah mentioned that I seemed to be forgetting things more often. Morrison nodded grimly. "Part of the plan. Make you seem incompetent, maybe even dangerous to yourself. Then when you had your accident, nobody would be surprised. Just a confused old man who probably shouldn't have been living alone anyway." The methodical, calculated cruelty of it was breathtaking. Justin hadn't just been planning to kill me, he'd been systematically destroying my reputation and my relationship with my daughter first. "We need to go back inside," Morrison said, checking his watch, "before Justin realizes we're not coming back and decides to run." But as we got out of the car, I realized that Justin running might be the least of our worries. Because through the ballroom windows, I could see him talking to Leah, his hands on her shoulders, his face close to hers. And even from this distance, I could see that she was crying. By the time Morrison and I reached the ballroom entrance, Justin had maneuvered Leah into a corner near the wedding cake table. From where we stood, I could see her shaking her head, tears streaming down her face. Her beautiful wedding makeup was ruined, black mascara tracks staining her cheeks. "He's already started," Morrison said grimly. "He's telling her his version of what happened outside." My heart sank as I watched Justin cup Leah's face in his hands, his mouth moving urgently. I couldn't hear the words, but I could imagine them. Poor Matthew was confused, possibly drinking too much, maybe showing signs of dementia. The stress of losing Sarah, the isolation, it was all catching up with him. Justin was probably painting himself as the concerned son-in-law, worried about his new father-in-law's mental state. "We need to get in there," I said, but Morrison held my arm. "Wait, let me record this too. The more evidence we have of his manipulation tactics, the better." Morrison pulled out his phone and started recording as we moved closer. Now I could hear fragments of their conversation. "Worried about him for months, sweetheart. Tonight he seemed really confused, almost paranoid. But Dad's never been like that before, Leah was saying through her tears. He's always been so sharp, so together. Grief affects people differently, baby, and losing your mom, being alone in that big house, it's not healthy for a man his age. I wanted to rush over there and shake her, make her see what was happening. But Morrison's hand on my arm kept me still. We need to let him hang himself, Morrison whispered. The more lies he tells her now, the more devastating it'll be when she hears the truth. Justin's voice carried clearly now. I think he might have been drinking tonight. He grabbed me outside, started accusing me of terrible things. When I tried to calm him down, he became aggressive. Aggressive? Leah's voice was shocked. Dad doesn't drink, and he's never been aggressive in his life. I know it's hard to accept, but people change when they're suffering. The man who raised you is still in there, but he needs help. Professional help. The manipulation was masterful. Justin was taking every conversation we'd had about my grief, every moment of vulnerability I'd shown, and twisting it into evidence of mental decline. To Leah, who hadn't seen me regularly in months thanks to his careful isolation tactics, it might even seem plausible. Where is he now? Leah asked, looking around the ballroom. I think he left. He was very upset when I couldn't agree with his paranoid accusations. What kind of accusations? Justin paused, and I could see him calculating how much to reveal. He thinks I'm only with you for money, Leah. He accused me of being some kind of con artist. Leah's laugh was bitter and hurt. That's ridiculous. You have your own career, your own money. Why would anyone think that? I don't know, sweetheart. Maybe because he can't imagine anyone loving you for who you are, instead of what you can provide. Blame. The cruelty of that statement took my breath away. Justin was making Leah doubt not just my mental state, but my love for her. He was suggesting that I saw her as nothing more than an extension of my wealth, when, in reality, she was the only thing in my life that mattered more than money. I need to find him, Leah said, starting to move away from the corner. Justin caught her arm. Maybe we should give him some space tonight. Let him calm down. We can deal with this tomorrow when he's had time to think clearly. But what if he's not thinking clearly? What if he's confused and alone somewhere? For a moment, I saw a flash of genuine frustration cross Justin's face. Leah's concern for me was interfering with his plan to make me disappear quietly from her life. Okay, he said finally. Let's go look for him. But Leah, you need to be prepared for the possibility that he might say more hurtful things. People with dementia sometimes turn on the people they love most. Dementia. He was actually planning to have me declared mentally incompetent. The life insurance, the gradual isolation, the medication tampering, it was all building toward a narrative where my death would seem like a mercy, a relief from a degenerative disease. Morrison and I stepped into the ballroom just as Leah and Justin began walking toward the entrance. When Leah saw me, her face crumpled with a mixture of relief and something else. Fear, maybe, or doubt. Dad, she said, her voice tentative, are you okay? Justin said you seemed upset. I looked at my daughter, my beautiful, trusting daughter, in her grandmother's pearls and her dream wedding dress, and felt my heart break all over again. In a few minutes, I was going to have to destroy every illusion she had about the man she'd just married. I'm fine, sweetheart, but we need to talk. Justin stepped slightly in front of Leah, a protective gesture that would have looked loving to any observer. Matthew, I think you should probably head home. It's been a long day, and you seem tired. I'm not going anywhere without my daughter. Dad, Leah said softly, maybe Justin's right. Maybe we should talk tomorrow when we're all... No. My voice was sharper than I intended. Leah, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Your husband is not who you think he is. Leah's face went pale. Behind her, several wedding guests had noticed the tension and were starting to stare. Justin's jaw tightened, but he kept his expression concerned and sympathetic. Matthew, he said gently, you're upsetting Leah. This is her wedding day. I'm not the one who's upsetting her. You are. You've been lying to her from the moment you met. Dad, please, Leah whispered, glancing around at the gathering crowd. You're scaring me. Those words hit me like a physical blow. My own daughter was afraid of me, thanks to months of Justin's careful manipulation, but I couldn't stop now. Morrison stepped up beside me. and I saw recognition dawn in Justin's eyes. "Leah," I said, "this is Detective Ray Morrison. I hired him 3 weeks ago to investigate your husband." The color drained from Leah's face completely. "You did what?" "Your father had some concerns about Justin's background," Morrison said, his voice calm and professional. "Concerns that turned out to be justified." Justin stepped forward, his mask of concern slipping. "This is harassment. You can't just spy on people and make up stories." "I didn't make up anything," Morrison said. He pulled out his phone and held it up. "Including the conversation you had with your father 20 minutes ago on the terrace where you discussed murdering Matthew for his money." Leah made a choking sound. "What?" "It's not true," Justin said quickly, but there was panic in his voice now. "He's lying, Leah. Your father hired some private detective to destroy our marriage." Morrison pressed play on his phone. Justin's voice came through clearly. "I told you the old man was lonely after his wife died. Leah was perfect, desperate for attention, easily manipulated." Leah staggered backward as if she'd been slapped. The wedding guests, who had gathered to watch, were dead silent, straining to hear every word. The recording continued. "Give it 6 months, maybe a year. These old guys, they have heart attacks all the time." "Stop," Leah whispered. But Morrison kept the recording playing. "The best part? Leah has no idea. She actually thinks I married her for love. Poor thing was so desperate after her mother died that she believed every word I said." Leah's legs gave out. She sank into a nearby chair, her face white as her wedding dress. Around us, wedding guests were murmuring in shock and disbelief. "Turn it off," Justin demanded, lunging for Morrison's phone. Morrison stepped back easily. "There's more, if you'd like to hear it. The part where you discuss your previous victims, for instance." "Victims?" Leah's voice was barely audible. Morrison looked at her with genuine sympathy. "Elizabeth Chen in Sacramento, Margaret Winters in Portland, both women who fell in love with your husband and died shortly after he gained access to their family's money." "That's insane," Justin said, but his voice was shaking now. "You can't prove any of this." "Actually, I can." Morrison pulled out his thick file folder. "Elizabeth's father died of a heart attack 3 months after she was killed in a car accident. Margaret's uncle fell down the stairs shortly after she inherited his construction business. Very similar to the heart attack you were planning for Matthew." Leah was staring at Justin with an expression I'd never seen before. Pure horror mixed with recognition. "The life insurance policy," she whispered. "What about it?" Justin asked. But I could see him calculating, trying to figure out how much we knew. "You convinced me to get Dad a $2 million policy. You said it was for my financial security." Leah's voice was getting stronger now, anger cutting through the shock. "But it wasn't for me, was it? It was for you." "Leah, sweetheart, you're not thinking clearly." "Don't!" The word came out like a whip crack. "Don't call me sweetheart. Don't touch me. Don't you dare try to manipulate me anymore." She stood up slowly, and I saw something in her face that reminded me of her mother. Sarah had looked exactly like that the one time I'd seen her truly angry. A cold, controlled fury that was more terrifying than any shouting. "How long?" Leah asked. "How long have you been planning this?" Justin's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Around us, the wedding guests were pulling out their phones, some recording, others calling what I assumed were family members or friends. "The medication tampering," Morrison said quietly. "We have evidence that Justin has been altering your father's prescription drugs, trying to make him seem confused or forgetful." Leah's eyes widened. "The aspirin. You were in Dad's bathroom last month." I can explain," Justin started. "You've been poisoning my father." Leah's voice was deadly quiet. "You've been isolating me from him, making me doubt him, planning to kill him, and you've been poisoning him." The word poisoning rippled through the crowd like wildfire. Someone gasped. Someone else swore loudly. "Leah, you have to understand, I love you." "You love my inheritance." Leah pulled off her engagement ring and threw it at his feet. "You love the idea of killing my father and taking everything he worked for." "I never said anything about killing." Morrison held up his phone again. "Would you like me to play that part of the recording again?" Justin looked around desperately, seeing the crowd of witnesses, the phones recording his every move, the complete collapse of his carefully constructed con. For a moment I thought he might try to run. Instead, he did something that surprised even Morrison. He smiled. "You think you've won," he said, looking directly at me, "but you have no idea what you've just started." The chill in his voice made everyone in the ballroom go silent. This wasn't the charming, manipulative Justin anymore. This was something else entirely. Something dangerous. "What's that supposed to mean?" I asked. Justin's smile widened, and for the first time I saw the real person beneath the mask. The person who had killed at least 3 people without a trace of remorse. "It means, Matthew, that dead men can't testify, and accidents can happen to anyone." Morrison stepped forward, his hand moving toward his jacket. "Is that a threat?" "It's a promise." That's when Leah did something that shocked us all. She stepped between Justin and me, her wedding dress rustling around her feet. "If you want to hurt my father," she said, her voice steady and strong, "you're going to have to go through me first." For the first time since this nightmare began, Justin looked genuinely surprised, and in that moment of surprise, Morrison made his move. Morrison's hand was already inside his jacket when Justin made his next move. But instead of trying to run or escalate the violence, he did something that caught us all off guard. He started laughing. It wasn't the nervous laughter of someone caught in a lie. It was cold, calculating, and genuinely amused. The sound made my skin crawl and sent a visible shudder through the wedding guests who were still close enough to hear. "You think this is over?" Justin said, his eyes moving from Morrison to me, to Leah. "You think exposing me here, in front of these people, actually changes anything?" Leah took a step closer to me, her hand finding mine. The simple gesture sent a wave of relief through me that was almost overwhelming. My daughter was choosing me. After months of manipulation and isolation, she was standing by my side. "It's over, Justin," she said, her voice stronger than I'd heard it in years. "Whatever you planned, whatever you thought you were going to accomplish, it's finished." Justin shook his head, that cold smile never leaving his face. "Sweet Leah, even now you don't understand what you're dealing with." Morrison had his phone out, and I could see he was calling someone. Police, most likely. But Justin seemed unconcerned by the prospect of law enforcement arrival. "Matthew," Justin said, turning his attention to me, "do you really think a recording and some circumstantial evidence are going to be enough? Do you think anyone is going to believe that a successful businessman like me is actually a serial killer?" The confidence in his voice was chilling. This wasn't the panic of someone whose plan had fallen apart. This was someone who had backup plans for his backup plans. "Because here's the thing," Justin continued, "I've been very careful over the years, very thorough. Elizabeth Chen's death, officially ruled an accident. Margaret Winter's uncle, natural causes. No one has ever been able to prove I was involved in anything." Morrison finished his call and stepped closer. "That was then, this is now. We have you on tape discussing premeditated murder. You have me on tape having a theoretical conversation with my father. Good luck proving intent beyond a reasonable doubt." The legal sophistication of his response sent another chill through me. This wasn't some small-time con artist who'd gotten lucky a few times. This was someone who understood the system, who had studied how to work within it. "Besides," Justin said, his gaze moving back to Leah, "even if somehow you manage to make any charges stick, what do you think happens to your precious daughter when I'm gone?" "What's that supposed to mean?" I demanded. Justin's smile widened. "Did you really think I was working alone? That I just happened to stumble into 3 perfect victims by pure chance?" The implication hit me like a sledgehammer. There are others. There's a whole network, Matthew. People who specialize in finding vulnerable targets, in setting up long-term cons, in making sure that when things go wrong, the consequences fall on someone else. Leah's grip on my hand tightened. Around us, the remaining wedding guests were backing away, sensing that this confrontation was moving into dangerous territory. "You're bluffing," Morrison said, but I could hear uncertainty in his voice. "Am I? Tell me, Detective Morrison, how do you think I found out about Matthew's financial situation so quickly? How do you think I knew exactly when Sarah died? Exactly how isolated and vulnerable he would be?" My blood turned to ice. "You were watching me before Sarah died. We were watching your family for months, wealthy widower with one child, successful business, no close relatives to ask uncomfortable questions. You were perfect. The casual way he said it, like we were cattle being evaluated for slaughter, made me feel sick. But it was his next words that truly terrified me. And when this plan failed, when you proved to be more observant than we expected, the network doesn't just disappear, they find other ways to get what they want. Are you threatening my daughter? The words came out as a growl, and I took a step toward Justin before Morrison caught my arm. I'm not threatening anyone, Matthew. I'm explaining reality. You think exposing me protects Leah? All you've done is paint a target on her back. The people I work with don't like loose ends. Leah's face had gone pale again, but her voice remained steady. Let them come. I'm not afraid of you or your friends. You should be, Justin said softly, because unlike me, some of them don't have any interest in keeping you alive. You were only useful as long as you could provide access to your father's money. Now, you're just a witness who knows too much. Morrison was moving now, positioning himself between Justin and the exit. That's enough. You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, and assault. On what authority? Justin asked. You're a private detective, not a police officer. You have no power to arrest anyone. But I do. The voice came from behind us. I turned to see a woman in a dark suit walking into the ballroom, her badge clearly visible on her belt. She was followed by 2 uniformed officers. Detective Sarah Chen, Sacramento PD, she said, her eyes locked on Justin. Elizabeth Chen was my sister. The color drained from Justin's face for the first time since this confrontation began. This wasn't part of his plan. This wasn't something he had prepared for. You have the right to remain silent, Detective Chen continued, pulling out handcuffs. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Wait, Justin said, his composure finally cracking. You can't arrest me based on a recording of a private conversation. I'm not arresting you for the recording, Chen said, snapping the handcuffs onto his wrists. I'm arresting you for the murder of my sister and the fraud you committed against her estate. You can't prove that. Chen smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Actually, I can. See, when Morrison contacted me about your current activities, I decided to reopen Elizabeth's case. Amazing what you find when you know what to look for. She nodded to one of the uniformed officers who stepped forward with an evidence bag. Elizabeth's car, the one that crashed and killed her, we found some very interesting things when we examined it more carefully, things that suggest the brake lines had been tampered with. Justin's face had gone ashen. That's impossible. I was never near her car, but your fingerprints were, hidden under the hood exactly where someone would put them if they were sabotaging the brake system. Fingerprints can be planted, and there's the insurance investigator who remembers you asking very specific questions about how car accidents are investigated, and the mechanic who remembers you asking about brake systems a week before Elizabeth died. I watched as Justin's carefully constructed world collapsed around him. Every contingency he'd planned for, every backup story he'd prepared was crumbling under the weight of actual evidence. Oh, and there's one more thing, Chen said. Margaret Winters didn't actually die. The silence that followed that statement was deafening. Justin stared at Chen as if she'd just spoken in a foreign language. Margaret Winters is alive and well and living in Seattle under a new name. Turns out, she faked her death after she figured out what you were planning. She's been working with law enforcement ever since, helping us track down your network. Justin's legs seemed to give out. The uniformed officers caught him as he slumped forward, the reality of his situation finally hitting him. 23 victims across 6 states, Chen continued. Margaret helped us identify all of them. You're going to be spending the rest of your life in prison, assuming some of the other families don't get to you first. Leah was crying now, but they were tears of relief rather than grief. She turned to me, burying her face against my chest. I'm so sorry, Dad, she whispered. I'm so sorry I didn't see it. I'm sorry I pulled away from you. I wrapped my arms around my daughter, feeling like I could finally breathe again after months of suffocation. It's not your fault, sweetheart. He was a professional. This is what he does. Did, Chen corrected. What he did. This particular career path just came to an end. As the officers led Justin away, He turned back one last time. The charming mask was completely gone now, replaced by something ugly and hateful. "This isn't over," he called out. "The network is bigger than you think. They'll find other ways." "Actually," Chen said, "it is over. See, while you were busy planning Matthew's death, we were busy rolling up your entire operation. Your network, as you call it, they're all in custody as of about an hour ago." The look of complete defeat on Justin's face was the most satisfying thing I'd seen in months. As the police car pulled away with Justin in the back seat, Leah and I stood together in the hotel parking lot. The wedding reception was officially over, though I suspected it would be talked about for years to come. "What happens now?" Leah asked. I looked at my daughter, still beautiful despite her ruined makeup and tear-stained dress. Still my little girl, despite everything that had happened. "Now," I said, "we go home. We have a lot of talking to do." Morrison appeared beside us, his work finally finished. "For what it's worth," he said, "you saved her life tonight, Matthew. If you hadn't gotten suspicious when you did, if you hadn't hired me when you did, this would have ended very differently." I nodded, but I wasn't thinking about what might have been. I was thinking about what was still to come, because while Justin was gone, the damage he'd done to my relationship with my daughter would take time to heal. The trust that had been broken, the months of manipulation and isolation, the poison he'd dripped into our family, all of that would require patience and work to overcome. But for the first time in almost a year, I had hope, because Leah had chosen me in the end. When it mattered most, when she had to decide between believing the man she'd married and trusting the father who'd raised her, she'd chosen family. She'd chosen love over lies. And that was enough to build on. 6 months later, I sat on my back porch watching Leah tend to the garden her mother had planted 15 years ago. Sarah's roses were blooming again for the first time since she'd died, as if they'd been waiting for Leah to come home and care for them properly. The legal proceedings had been swift once Detective Chen's investigation uncovered the full scope of Justin's network. 23 victims across 6 states, just as she'd said. The trial had made national news, with Leah and me testifying about his attempts to manipulate and ultimately murder me for my money. Justin received 4 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. His father, Marcus, got 15 years for conspiracy. The insurance agent who'd helped set up fraudulent policies got 10 years. 7 other members of their network were sentenced to various terms, all of them substantial. But the legal victory, satisfying as it was, hadn't been the hardest part of the past 6 months. The hardest part had been rebuilding my relationship with my daughter. "Dad," Leah called from the garden, "do you remember what Mom used to say about the white roses?" I smiled, watching her carefully deadhead the blooms, just like Sarah had taught her when she was 12. That they represented new beginnings. That's why she planted them by the kitchen window, so she could see them every morning while she made coffee. Leah nodded, her hands gentle on the delicate petals. She'd moved back home 3 weeks after the wedding, partly for practical reasons. The annulment proceedings were complicated, and she needed emotional support, but mostly because we both realized how much we'd missed each other. The first month had been difficult. Leah was dealing with the humiliation of having been so thoroughly deceived, the guilt of having pushed me away, and the trauma of discovering that the man she'd married had been planning to murder her father. She'd barely spoken for the first 2 weeks, moving through the house like a ghost. I'd been struggling too, not with anger toward her. I'd never been angry with her, but with my own guilt. I kept thinking about all the signs I'd missed, all the times I could have spoken up sooner, all the ways I might have protected her better. It was Detective Chen who'd helped us both understand what we'd been dealing with. "These people are professionals," she'd told us during one of our follow-up meetings. "They study psychology, they understand human nature, they know exactly how to exploit people's vulnerabilities." Elizabeth was a brilliant woman, graphic designer, ran her own business, had a master's degree in fine arts. Margaret was a successful entrepreneur who'd built her uncle's construction company into a multi-million-dollar operation. You're not weak or stupid if you fall for their manipulation. You're human. That had been the turning point for Leah, realizing that she wasn't uniquely gullible or naive. that she'd been targeted by someone who'd perfected the art of deception over many years. The turning point for us as a family had come during the third week when Leah found me going through Sarah's jewelry box. "What are you doing?" she'd asked, finding me sitting on my bed with the small wooden box open in front of me. "Looking for your mother's engagement ring," I'd said. "I thought maybe you'd want to have it reset, make it into something new." She'd sat down beside me, picking up the simple solitaire that Sarah had worn for 43 years. "Why?" "Because Justin gave you a ring that was bought with stolen money, based on lies. And someday, when you're ready to trust someone again, you should have something real to give them." That's when she'd started crying. Not the desperate sobs of someone in crisis, but the quiet tears of someone finally allowing themselves to grieve. "I don't know if I'll ever be ready to trust someone again," she'd whispered. "You will," I'd said, putting my arm around her. "Maybe not today, maybe not this year, but you will. Because you're your mother's daughter, and she never let fear stop her from loving." We'd spent the rest of that evening going through Sarah's things together, sharing memories and stories that neither of us had talked about since she died. It was the first time in over a year that Leah and I had really talked, really connected the way we used to. Now, 6 months later, watching her in the garden, I could see that she was healing. She'd started working again, freelance marketing, nothing too demanding, and had even gone on a few casual dates. Nothing serious, but the fact that she was open to meeting people again was a good sign. "The roses look good," I called out. "They should. I've been reading Mom's gardening journals." She stood up, brushing dirt off her knees. "Did you know she wrote down everything? When to plant, when to prune, which fertilizers worked best. It's like having her here, teaching me." I smiled. That was so like Sarah. Methodical, thorough, always thinking ahead. "She'd be proud of how you're taking care of them." "She'd be proud that we're taking care of each other," Leah said, walking over to sit beside me on the porch steps. It was true. The crisis with Justin had forced us to confront some uncomfortable truths about how we'd drifted apart after Sarah's death. I'd become too dependent on Leah for emotional support, and she'd felt guilty about wanting to build her own life. Justin had exploited those feelings, but they'd existed before he came along. Now we had boundaries that felt healthy instead of forced. Leah had her own apartment again, a small place downtown that she decorated with some of Sarah's furniture mixed with her own things. We had dinner together twice a week and talked on the phone most days, but we weren't each other's only source of companionship anymore. I'd started attending a grief support group, something I should have done right after Sarah died. Leah had joined a young professionals networking group and was making new friends. We were both building lives that were full enough that we could enjoy our time together without needing it desperately. "Morrison called this morning," I said. "Justin's final appeal was denied." Leah nodded. We'd been following the legal proceedings, though more out of a desire for closure than any real concern that he might be released. The evidence against him had been overwhelming. "Good," she said simply. "I know I shouldn't say this, but I hope he rots in that cell." I understood the feeling. The rage had taken a long time to fade, and honestly, it had never completely disappeared. What Justin had done to Leah, the way he'd systematically destroyed her confidence and isolated her from me, was unforgivable. But I'd learned something important over the past 6 months. Holding on to anger was like taking poison and expecting someone else to die. Justin was gone, locked away forever, and the only person my anger could hurt now was me. "He will," I said. "But more importantly, we're free." And we were. The insurance policy had been canceled, the money returned. I'd updated my will to leave everything to Leah again, but this time with safeguards, trusts, and conditions that would protect her from anyone who might try to exploit her in the future. Not because I didn't trust her judgment, but because I'd learned that predators, like Justin, were always looking for their next victim. "I've been thinking," Leah said, "about what Detective Chen said, about other families who might be dealing with this. What about it? Maybe we could help somehow. Not officially, but I don't know. Maybe there's a way to use what we learned to help other people recognize the warning signs." It was a generous thought, very much in keeping with the woman Leah was becoming. The experience with Justin could have made her bitter and closed off, but instead it seemed to have made her more empathetic, more aware of other people's vulnerabilities. "We could talk to Chen about it," I said. "See if there's some kind of victim advocacy program we could support." "I'd like that." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sunset over the garden Sarah had planted. The white roses were glowing in the evening light, and I could almost imagine her standing among them, smiling at how well her daughter was caring for her flowers. "Dad," Leah said eventually, "I need to tell you something." Something in her tone made me look at her more carefully. "What is it?" "I met someone." My first instinct was protective concern. It was too soon. She was too vulnerable. What if this person was another predator? But I forced myself to listen instead of react. "His name is David. He's a teacher at the elementary school where I've been doing some marketing work." She was talking carefully, watching my face for my reaction. "But we've been having coffee together for a few weeks." "What's he like?" "Kind, patient. He knows about everything that happened. I told him early on because I figured if he was going to run, better to find out sooner rather than later." "But he didn't run." "No. He said he admired my strength for getting through it." She paused. "Dad, I'm not rushing into anything. I'm being very careful. But I think I'm ready to start trusting people again." I felt a complex mix of emotions: pride in her courage, worry about her safety, happiness that she was moving forward, and a deep, abiding relief that Justin hadn't managed to destroy her capacity for love. "I'd like to meet him," I said. "Really? You're not going to hire another private detective to investigate his background?" I laughed. I considered it. "But no, I think I'll trust your judgment this time." "Good," she said, smiling, "because I've gotten pretty good at spotting the warning signs." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, I thought about everything we'd been through, everything we'd lost and found again. Justin had tried to destroy our family, but in the end, he'd only made us stronger. The bond between a father and daughter, when it's built on real love and respect, is harder to break than predators like Justin understand. They see the surface vulnerabilities, grief, loneliness, the need for connection, but they miss the deeper strength that comes from years of genuine care and sacrifice. Sarah used to say that the strongest trees were the ones that had weathered the worst storms, that the roots grew deeper and the trunk grew thicker when they had to fight to survive. Sitting there with Leah in the garden her mother had planted, surrounded by roses that had bloomed again after nearly dying, I understood what she meant. We had weathered our storm, and we were still standing together.